This is the second in a series that Pearson is hosting in combination with Ashoka to highlight new ideas in education, as well as practical innovations for how we can drive change and expand access for every student. I think it's fair to say that President Crow is a leader in this in the United States, but also around the world. So at Arizona State, Michael's leading a radical change in how they think about the university, one that was heralded in Newsweek as one of the most radical redesigns in higher learning since the introduction of the modern research university, and which has led them to be the first Ashoka Changemaker campus in the United States. So I think to kick off the conversation, it's fair to say there's been a huge amount of change in higher education in the last 10 years. What do you think have been the major drivers of the change?
You know, I think the bigger forces driving change in higher education are the fact that as the world grows and matures, and as the economies around the planet begin to mature, as democracies begin to emerge, the drive and the desire to create abilities for human beings to learn at higher levels, to understand, to grasp, to create, to drive new solutions forward is going up dramatically. So what you're seeing is the maturation of a planet, of a civilization, from being somewhat backward to being less backward. And so it's basically a function of social and cultural maturation.
And as you think about the future of university, you've set out a vision for the new American university. What would that look like?
So the vision that we have for the new American university is an institution which is deeply committed to inclusion, where we want to measure our success not based on who we exclude, but who we include and how they succeed. We think that's very important to democracy. And then also the university taking on responsibility for the social, cultural, environmental, and health outcomes of the communities in which they are embedded, which is a different logic for universities. That is, rather than just somehow being randomly engaged in the community, actually saying, well, we're partly responsible, if not significantly responsible, for certain kinds of outcomes. And when you think about an institution being responsible, you begin to rethink how that institution might work. So that's the fundamental premise behind the design of the model that we call the new American university.
Interesting. And I think you've described in the past that there are 8 principles or 8 initiatives that underlie that. Could you describe those?
So those are what we call design aspirations, and so those are in a sense the direction that we want to move. So one is built around the idea that where you're located is essentially critically important to the design of the institution, being embedded in the community. We have a second one which is called social embeddedness, which is linked to the university not being distant from problems, but being close to problems and close to issues. Another that we have is called intellectual fusion, where rather than just accept prescriptive social constructs of the organization of the knowledge enterprise, you design the knowledge enterprise to the things that you're confronting. So if you look at an issue like sustainability or global warming or global climate change, what you see there is that the disciplines as structured have been completely inadequate to grasping and fully understanding the solutions to that complex type of problem. So that's an example of that. We have another design aspiration, which is that the university should facilitate and be entrepreneurial itself. That is, it should facilitate entrepreneurship and enterprise development, both social and business, and that it in and of itself should be entrepreneurial as a core fundamental feature of the institution. So these design aspirations are the methodological objectives that we have to attain the vision for the university being more accessible and more excellent at the same time.
That's great, and I think that's really a new model for the university, in particular about accessibility. I mean, in the past, higher education may have been a way to sort people out, whereas the vision you seem to be laying out is a way of raising everyone up collectively.
Well, you know, what's happened is that we fought revolutions around the world to make certain that class was no longer the determiner of a person's trajectory, that it was going to be based on your own effort and your own merit. And so what that would mean then in a full-fledged democracy is it would mean having universities which do not use exclusion or false exclusion as a method of granting status or having status. And so from our perspective, we think that an institution that thinks of itself as a public university is not successful unless its student body is actually representative of the public. That is, of the socioeconomic diversity of whatever public they serve. If they're not representative of that diversity, then they're not fulfilling their mission unless, and this would be an error on their part, the leaders of those institutions believe that talent is distributed according to family income, when of course talent is not distributed according to family income. And so public universities must have that as their unique mission. Therefore, public universities, I'm speaking now about the United States, public universities that don't drive to be enabling high levels of accessibility, they are not fulfilling their purpose, they're not fulfilling their mission, they're not as successful as they should be.
And how does that impact the campus? I mean, we know that there's a huge amount of positive reinforcement through diversity. Can you see that on the campus and feel that?
We feel it in every possible way. We see that from the kind of socioeconomic diversity that we have, which our student body does reflect the socioeconomic diversity of our state, and all income levels and all ethnicities and all of the things that would capture that. And so what you get is an improved and enhanced learning environment, but you also get an incubator, if you will, for what our society actually is. And so if the university can operate in a way in which the breadth of the society is captured in the university, you can facilitate the pathway to creative solutions across many dimensions of our existence, on the social side, on the technological side, on the cultural side, across all aspects. And so it allows us to create an institution capable of, in a sense, emulating what we might be or what we might attain.
I think you've set out this idea of use-inspired research, which
Yes.
seems to fit in with that. Could you describe what that is?
So use-inspired scholarship, use-inspired research is one of the 8 design aspirations, and what we're working toward there is not the elimination of the historic university focus on curiosity-driven research, which means the more you think about its use, the less valuable it will be. That's the basic culture of most academic research environments. What we're basically saying is that use-inspired or problem-oriented research is just as valuable and just as capable of deriving the kind of intellectual environments that we need for learning as curiosity-driven research. And so that's been something that's really driven us. We sometimes call that the Pasteur's principle, after Louis Pasteur, this notion of a fundamental scientist studying microorganisms, but for a purpose.
And you've talked a lot about how that impacts sort of health research as well, and how health outcomes actually become a driver of the fundamental research.
Yeah, so it is the case that one of the things that we have in our, at least in American society right now, is that we have widely disparate health outcomes, health span outcomes in particular, also linked largely to personal income. So one of the things that we've done even within ASU is we've gone back in and restructured all of our health-oriented teaching, learning, and discovery programs ourselves around the notion of measuring the success of our programs related to the students we produce, but also related to the health outcome changes in the community itself. That is actually making measurements in the community and saying whether or not the university is contributing to those positive adjustments in health outcomes.
That's a huge amount of responsibility to take on for the university. So did you welcome that, or what inspired you to be willing to take that on?
Well, I think the universities had drifted, in my mind, too far from the front lines of important changes. And this doesn't mean that universities aren't driving change. They are, but what it means is that the universities were often throwing up their hands. For instance, in K through 12 education, universities would often say, well, it's someone else's problem. K through 12 underperformance is someone else's problem. Yeah. Well, it's not someone else's problem. We produce the teachers, we educate the principals, we educate the people that write the textbooks and the methodologies and the learning platforms for everybody that's involved in K through 12 education. So if K through 12 education is not succeeding at the level that we would like it to succeed, who is responsible? Well, the people that produce all the knowledge and all the teachers must be partly responsible.
I think there are a lot of parallels there for work we're doing in Pearson now around efficacy, and it's a similar approach of saying, if we make education products and services, how can we start to take more ownership over outcomes? Mm-hmm. How has that changed? How have you thought about that, and how has that changed the activities that you've undertaken at the university, in education in particular?
Well, it changes everything. I mean, so what we've gone to is, we actually added to our vision statement that we would be responsible, that we would take responsibility for social, cultural, economic, as well as health-oriented outcomes and environmental-oriented outcomes. And that means then, if you're going to do that, the concept of efficacy and the concept of measuring efficacy and understanding efficacy is really important. And so you begin to reconceptualize the university as something other than a separate entity. So if you go all the way back to Plato's Academy, and if you go all the way back to the medieval universities that emerged in the UK and in the rest of Europe, these were institutions that were separate from, by design, society. And they're separate from society. And so what we have said is that some of the universities, maybe most of the public universities, should be anything but separate. They should be deeply embedded into society, helping society to achieve its overall objectives, rather than having this sort of the concept of the ivory tower, or the what Plato called the veil of ignorance.
Absolutely. And there's been increasing research to show, maybe by Ed Glazer or Richard Florida, about the virtuous effects that the university can have on a city or a region. Are there any examples in Arizona of how you've actually had a positive effect on the community?
Lots of examples. I mean, we've worked on new models for teaching, new educational models, new models for entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, and business entrepreneurship, engagement at the community level, engagement at the ecosystem level, that is the broader community. We think, and back to Richard Florida's work, who you talk about, I mean, what Richard really talks about is how the universities create and, in a sense, think of economics not as you learned it in microeconomic theory. You were an economics major at Columbia. Think of it not as microeconomic theory, think of it as evolutionary economic theory. So in Richard Nelson's work and Sidney Winter's work, when they talk about evolutionary economic theory, they're talking about how do you bring about variability and how do you understand change. So it's all about change. It's all about changing routine, and the way that you can drive change or drive evolutionary change is by finding those particular variables. Universities can do this also, where you can affect it. So in our case, it's been about stimulating entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship learning within the university. It's about working with groups like the Ashoka Foundation on the Changemaker Project, where we can find ways in which we can create opportunities in which change becomes a concept that people are able to embrace, because they can think and behave on an evolutionary kind of scale. So they can see the way things are, then they can figure out which routines need to be altered in how things are done, either in education or in social services or in business development or whatever, and then you can go in and find the routine that needs to be changed, change that routine by a new practice, a new idea, a new technology, a new platform, and then from that you stimulate evolutionary changes that then affect the entire system. So we're sort of designing our institution within our community to be able to operate on that basis.
If you were to give advice to other leaders or other heads of higher education institutions that were just starting this today, what would be your advice?
Give up on the notion of thinking about what other university you want to overtake in terms of status. This obsession with status is probably net negative in every possible way. Move past the notion that somehow your objective is to outperform someone else in what they're already doing, because that requires very little intellectual energy whatsoever. And think about what it is that you actually should be doing for your university to be successful in the environment that you're in, and that then should become the way in which you drive your logic. So going forward, what we have to demonstrate is a model wherein any student with talent from any family background across a very broad cross-section of our society can come to a university, can interact with a faculty, wherein that following that they will perform and be as creative and as impactful and as powerful as any student that goes to any ultra selective institution. Now, that means then that we have to be able to perform at the same level. We're not there yet, but we're moving rapidly in that direction. So that will then, in a sense, prove the model that it in fact is about your own individual talents, and prove the model that in a democracy, in an idealized democracy, the democracy can create institutions generated at the will of the public and in the trust of the public as public trusts to which any student has an equal chance of success.
My name is Simon from the Economist Intelligence Unit. You spoke a lot about searching for talent for people who should be studying at research level. How do you make sure that there is that kind of talent available to you? What kind of things are you doing in your community to make sure that someone from a poor socioeconomic background wants to go to university?
So it's a long list of things that we're working on. So we run 2 schools ourselves with a couple thousand kids between these 2 schools. And the purpose of these schools is they're called charter schools in Arizona. They're public schools. Any child can arrive. There's no cost to attend the school. One of the schools is in a district or in an area with where 90% of the students are eligible for what in the United States is called free lunch funding, which means they're from a very low income family. Our objective with that school, which when we took over was an F in its grade, it was a failing school, is to make certain not only that it's a successful school, which it now is just a few years later. The high school is already graded an A, and the elementary school is almost an A, it's a B, and so this is a huge achievement. But more important than that for us is our objective of graduating every single student. And none of these students in this public school, none, not a single one was selected. It's not a school that's for the children of the university professors or for others where you decide what school district. It's for the kids in that particular neighborhood who have essentially very bad starting conditions from a family income perspective, just speaking about that. And so that's one thing that we're doing. Other things that we're doing is that we're developing a tool for middle school students where we have private philanthropy backing us up. So we built a tool with our own resources called eAdvisor that allows us to simulate the pathway to a successful degree outcome on a tireless kind of basis. And so what was your undergraduate major? Italian. And did you always want to be an Italian major? You what? Right, but let's say you're an Italian major and you decided along the way that you really wanted to be a political science major. So the system that we developed would allow you to sort of game that or simulate that and then come back to you and say, this is exactly, it would say, well, I know how you did on this test and I know how you did here and this course and you didn't take this course. And this system that we developed called eAdvisor then simulates for you your pathway to anything that you want to attain. Now imagine then that you're in the middle school somewhere and you don't have parents that spend time talking about what it might be like to study Italian and what it might be like to then become a writer or an intelligence officer for the Economist magazine or something. Not every parent has that sort of conceptual view. So we're building a tool which allows a middle school student to simulate their pathway to whatever it is that they want to do down the road by actually engaging them relative to their middle school curriculum, their high school curriculum, each of the choices that they will make in high school, because it turns out that many students don't get on the track to have access to the educational opportunity that we're talking about because they take the wrong courses or they take the easy path or they don't understand the math route. Now match that with another thing that we're working on with a range of companies, including Pearson, and this is a set of adaptive learning technologies. Now ultimately, if you take an interactive simulation tool for middle school students relative to their ultimate development, and then you match that up with adaptive learning platforms, all of a sudden you're going to be on a path where you could take any child in any family and begin to have a personalized engagement tool allowing them to actually find a way to facilitate their dreams. And so that's the second thing that we're doing. Now, I gave you 2 examples, the schools and these tools. We're probably doing 50 things, but those are 2 of them. And I'd say the other thing that we're doing, and probably at the end of the day the most important thing, was we took our education college and renovated it down to the foundation. So we took down the entire structure. And we said we're no longer satisfied with just the critique and criticism of the underperforming teachers that are out there. That actually has amounted to nothing. So then we restructured that into a teacher's college where the production of teachers is its only objective. And from that, we've then altered the curriculum, altered the selection criteria. We're doing psychological and emotional thinking about who should be a teacher and how they might be educated. And so we're changing the pathway of who gets on the teacher training track, who ultimately is successful on the teacher training track. So just take those 3 things. The school, the demonstration school, the tools for decision making for the middle school students, and the complete re-engineering of how we produce a teacher. So those are three things that we're doing.
Rob, please.
Yeah. Do you feel like what you're doing at ASU is somewhat isolated, or are you seeing examples around the world of like-minded institutions? And if so, would love to hear about it.
Yeah, so in terms of change makers, people that we're producing, that we're graduating, that are going on, it's almost unbelievable to see. I mean, it's partly the millennial nets, the people who are, I think, actually a new kind of species of Homo sapiens sapien. They are human beings augmented by ever-present knowledge tools that are actually attached to their bodies. And it's just unbelievable. I mean, it's a whole new thing. You take those people with their civic mindedness, and then you put them into an institution like we've created at ASU and a few other places have created, and then you begin to produce these people who only think about making change and only think about how do you tackle these problems which have been seen by the previous generations to be intractable. I mean, you can see it now with the underachievement in the political sector, where they just throw their hands up. I mean, Social Security will never work, or this never works, or this never works, or you can't solve this, or you can't solve that. Well, of course, all of those statements are false. It's just that the people that are talking about it aren't capable enough. They're not empowered enough. They're not enough change oriented. So in our case, we are completely confident, and we have lots of evidence of social enterprise architects and social change architects and new ways of thinking about businesses and new ways of driving businesses and the creation of businesses, while undergraduates, and still continuing their education. So we have immense amounts of evidence of that at ASU. In terms of other schools, I think it's going on elsewhere also, not just ASU. And then I think that what this will do is that what we're going to see is a significant facilitation of new ideas. Now, I think a lot of it will come not through the political sector. It won't be necessarily solutions derived by government, although there needs to be many that are derived by government, but solutions that are derived by action, by the derivation of a new way of solving high school graduation dropout rates, or new ways to attack unevenness in social equity and the distribution of social services and social support and so forth. Now, so what you'll see is the use of technologies and the use of tools and the use of innovation models and entrepreneurship models. And so it's kind of fascinating to me. I mean, one of the things that drives me, I graduated from high school 40 years ago this year, and the change in who goes to college and what you learn at college and what college is about and what your opportunities are in college is like as profound as what it must have been like before there were books. I mean, it's that big of a change because you've got unbelievable data and tools and information and mechanisms. And so ASU is doing this, a few other places are doing this, and I think that out of colleges and universities will come a lot of these transformative people, transformative teams and cooperators and change makers in that sense. And so I think it's going on all over. To your first comment on global and globalization and American higher education designs and so forth, I was in a sort of a secret meeting last year in Germany with 20 or so rectors of the leaders of some German public universities, and they're whispering in this meeting, and we're talking, and what they're talking about is how to change their universities and how to advance their universities in different models. I was at a meeting in Barcelona where the leading research universities in Europe were getting together trying to ask the same kind of thing. So I think everybody, or most everyone, I mean, occasionally you'll meet a school that someone will say, oh, well, listen, everything's fantastic. We've been here for 1,000 years. Go away. I don't know who you are. But that will be the exception. Most schools, most universities, most colleges realize that they need to rethink how they operate and how they work. Only a few of them can do it. So one of the things that we're trying to do right now is we're advancing an innovation cluster, a group of institutions that are willing to say the following. Who's willing to try to expand access to a broader socioeconomic demographic? Who's willing to work to lower cost so that we can get cost containment through the introduction of technology and tools and reorganizations and restructuring? Who's willing to enhance quality and to expand throughput, that is, more people having access? You have to make all those things happen because you can't build institutions fast enough. Well, we found 10 other schools in the United States, 10 major public universities willing to work with us. And so people are moving forward in new and different kinds of ways. And so I think that on a global scale, this is beginning to happen. And you can certainly see new models for higher education emerging. And so I'm very positive about where things are headed.